It was the ringtone that always made my stomach drop. The generic, tinny sound of my mother's ringtone. For most people, a call from home is a comfort. For me, it was like receiving a summons to a trial where I already knew the verdict. I stared at the screen for 3 full rings, my coffee growing cold on the desk beside me. The name flashed, Mom. I hadn't spoken to them in 8 months. 8 months of silence. 8 months of healing.
And now this.
I answered. Hello? Her voice wasn't warm. It was direct, like a business memo.
Sarah.
We're having Christmas dinner this year. Full family. You should come. No, how are you? No, we miss you. Just an order. I should have said no. Every rational bone in my body screamed at me to make up an excuse. I had work. I had a life. I had a perfectly good reason to stay in my tiny apartment in the city and pretend the holiday didn't exist. But deep down, buried under years of rejection, there was a stupid, hopeful little girl who still wanted her parents' approval. That little girl whispered, maybe this time it will be different. Maybe they've changed. They want me there? I asked, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. Of course. Your family, my mother said, but the words felt hollow, like she was reading them from a script. Christmas Eve.
6 o'clock.
Don't be late. And then she hung up. No pleasantries. No goodbye. Just a dial tone. I put the phone down and looked around my apartment. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I had built this life from nothing. I had escaped the small town, the small mines, and the shadow of my older brother, Mark, the golden child, the successful son, the one who could do no wrong. For years, I was the invisible one, the one who was tolerated but not celebrated. My parents had a phrase they liked to use when they were angry with me. They never said it in public, of course, only in the privacy of our home. They called me their mistake, their failed attempt. I remember being 10 years old and asking my mom why she looked at old photos of Mark with such joy, but looked at me with a tired resignation. She told me, we already had our perfect family, Sarah. We didn't plan on you, but we did our duty.
Duty.
That's what I was. A duty. An obligation. But still I went. I bought a train ticket. I wrapped a small, thoughtful gift for them, a nice scarf for my mom, a book for my dad. I told myself I was being the bigger person. I told myself I was going back to show them that their mistake turned out just fine. I dressed nicely. Not flashy, but professional. I wore a simple black dress and a coat. I didn't want to look like I was trying too hard. I just wanted to look normal. Worthy. As the train pulled into the station of my hometown, the familiar dread settled in my chest like a cold stone. The streets looked smaller. The houses looked grayer. It felt like stepping back in time, back into a skin I had worked so hard to shed. I walked the 15 minutes to my parents' house. The lights were on. I could hear laughter from inside. For a second, my heart lifted. Maybe it was a happy gathering. Maybe they were laughing, waiting for me to arrive. I knocked. The door swung open, and there stood my brother, Mark. He was taller than me, broader, with that same smug smile he'd had since childhood. He looked me up and down, a smirk playing on his lips. Well. The late payment showed up. He chuckled, loud enough for everyone inside to hear. I forced a smile.
Hi, Mark.
I stepped inside. The living room was decorated in garish red and gold. The tree was overflowing with presents. And there, sitting in their matching armchairs like a king and queen holding court, were my parents. My father didn't even look up from his drink. My mother gave me a tight, brief nod.
Sarah.
You're here. Dinner is almost ready. Go wash up, she said, as if I were still a grubby child. I sat down on the edge of the sofa, an outsider in my own family. The conversation continued around me. They talked about Mark's new promotion at the bank. They talked about his beautiful fiancée, who was sitting beside him, glowing with pride. They talked about the new car my dad was buying. No one asked me about my life. No one asked about my job. I worked for a small digital media startup in the city. It wasn't a bank, but it was mine. I was building something. But to them, if you weren't a doctor, a lawyer, or a banker, You were a failure. I sat there, holding my cold glass of water, watching this perfect family portrait, and I realized I was the smudge in the corner. The one they wished they could Photoshop out. And then, my mother called us to the dining table. The table was set with a fine china, the one she only used for important occasions. I took a seat, trying to make myself small. My father, Robert, stood at the head of the table, carving knife in hand, ready to slice into the turkey. He cleared his throat. It was time for his annual Christmas speech. Another year done, he began looking at Mark. And I have to say, I am incredibly proud of my son. Mark, you've exceeded every expectation. You've made this family proud. Mark beamed. My mother clapped softly. Then, my father's eyes landed on me. It was a cold, analytical stare, like he was assessing a piece of furniture that had seen better days. And Sarah, he said, pausing for effect. The room went silent. Well, you're here. My mother giggled. It was a nasty, whispered giggle. Mark snickered into his wine glass. I felt my face burn. I wanted to disappear. But then, my father wasn't done. He put the carving knife down and picked up his glass of whiskey. He was emboldened by the alcohol. He was playing to his audience. You know, he said, addressing the table but looking at me. When you're young, you plan your life. You plan your career, your marriage, your family. You plan for 2 children. A boy and a girl. The perfect set. He took a sip of his drink. But sometimes, life throws you a curveball. Sometimes, the contraception fails. The word hit me like a physical slap. Contraception. My mother laughed openly now. Oh, Robert, stop. I'm just being honest, he said, his eyes still locked on mine. It's Christmas. A time for honesty. Sarah, you were our failed contraception. But we made the best of it. We did our duty. Failed contraception. They weren't just calling me a mistake. They were reducing me to a medical accident. A biological error. In front of my brother, his fiancée, and the ghost of every Christmas I had ever suffered through. The room was spinning. I looked at Mark, expecting to see a flicker of sympathy. He just shrugged, as if to say, well, it's true. I looked at my mother. She was buttering a roll, completely unbothered. I opened my mouth to speak, to defend myself, to scream, to cry. But no words came. I was paralyzed. The shame was so deep, so complete, it swallowed my voice. I pushed my chair back. The screech of the legs on the hardwood floor was the only sound. I grabbed my coat from the back of the chair. Where are you going? My mother asked, annoyed, as if I was ruining her dinner party by being upset. I can't do this, I whispered. I walked out of the dining room, through the living room, and out the front door into the freezing December night. I didn't cry until I was halfway down the street. The tears froze on my cheeks. I walked to the train station, not knowing when the next train was, not caring. I just had to get away from them. I sat on a cold metal bench on the empty platform, hugging myself, shivering. My phone buzzed. A text from Mark. Mom says you left your scarf. Also, you forgot to say goodbye to everyone.
Rude. Rude.
I was rude. I wasn't a human being with feelings who had just been publicly humiliated. I was just rude. I turned my phone off. I sat in the darkness, the wind biting through my coat, and I made a decision. I was done. No more hoping. No more trying. They had drawn the line. They had declared, in front of witnesses, that I was nothing more than a failed biological event. They had no idea that in that moment of absolute darkness, a fire was lit inside me. A cold, quiet fire. It wasn't a fire of anger. It was a fire of purpose. I was going to show them, not for their approval, but to prove to myself that I was more than their mistake. I was going to become so successful, so undeniable, that the world would know my name. And one day, they would choke on theirs. The train ride back to the city was a blur. I stared out the window at the dark countryside, replaying the scene over and over again. Failed contraception. The words echoed in my head, but with each mile that passed, they hurt a little less, and they fueled a little more. When I finally got back to my apartment, I didn't crawl into bed. I didn't call a friend to cry. I sat at my laptop and I opened my work files. You see, I hadn't told them what I really did. To them, I worked at a little internet company. In reality, I was the lead data analyst for a rapidly growing digital news startup. We weren't just any company. We were on the verge of something huge. We had developed an algorithm that predicted viral news trends with terrifying accuracy, and we were about to launch a major partnership with a global television network. My boss, a woman named Elena who believed in me more than my own parents ever had been hinting at a big announcement for weeks. "Get ready, Sarah," she'd said. "Your work is about to be seen by the whole world." I had kept that to myself. I didn't want to tell my family because I knew they'd just dismiss it. Oh, some silly internet thing. But now, that project became my lifeline. It became my weapon. I threw myself into my work with an obsession I didn't know I possessed. I was the first one in the office and the last one to leave. I didn't socialize. I didn't date. I just worked. The pain of that Christmas dinner was the fuel, and my ambition was the engine. Weeks turned into months. The winter snow melted into the gray slush of early spring. And then the news came. Elena called me into her office. Her face was serious. "Sarah, sit down." My heart pounded. Was I being fired? Had I pushed too hard? "The board met last night," she said. "The partnership with CNN International is official. They love our data. They love our projections. But they want a face for the launch. They want someone who understands the numbers, who can explain them to a global audience in a way that makes sense." She leaned forward. "I recommended you. They saw your work. They watched a presentation you did last month. They want you, Sarah. They want you to be the on-air analyst for the segment." I stared at her. "Me? On television? On CNN? Starting next month. It's a weekly feature. The data point. You'll be on air, breaking down the biggest stories of the week using our algorithm. It's a massive deal." I should have been jumping for joy. And a part of me was. But a darker, quieter part of me just smiled. A plan was forming. A plan so perfect, so delicious, I didn't tell a soul. Not even Elena. The next few weeks were a blur of rehearsals, makeup tests, and learning how to talk to a camera. I was terrified, but I used that terror. I turned it into focus. My parents, of course, had no idea. After Christmas, I had gone completely radio silent. I didn't answer their calls. I didn't reply to Mark's smug texts. They sent a few half-hearted messages. "Are you ignoring us? We were just joking, don't be so sensitive," but eventually, the silence from my end was met with silence from theirs. They didn't care enough to fight for me. I was just the failed contraception, after all. Why would they fight for an accident? They had no idea that while they were living their small, comfortable lives, I was building a fortress. A fortress of skill, of knowledge, and of silence. My first day on air arrived. I stood behind the massive CNN desk, the bright lights hot on my face, the camera lens staring at me like a black eye. The producer counted down in my ear. 3, 2, 1. And I was live. My voice, for the first time, was beamed into millions of homes around the world. I talked about data. I talked about trends. I was calm, professional, and confident. I wasn't Sarah, the family mistake. I was Sarah Chun, data analyst. After the segment, the control room erupted in applause. Elena was crying. My phone, which I had left in my locker, was blowing up with messages from colleagues and old college friends. But there was nothing from my family. And that was fine. The plan wasn't ready yet. The launch was just the beginning. We were building towards something bigger. A special report. A year-end review. The months rolled on. I became a familiar face. I did segments on elections, on economic shifts, on viral social movements. I was good at it. More than good, I was natural. The little girl who was told she was a mistake was now speaking to the world, and the world was listening. Meanwhile, back in my hometown, life went on. I knew this because, despite my silence, I kept a window open. I followed my brother on social media from a dummy account, of course. I saw his wedding photos. I saw my parents posing with the happy couple. I saw the birth of his first child. The golden child producing a golden grandchild. They looked so happy. So complete. A perfect family portrait, with me cropped out forever. It stung. I won't lie. It stung to see them move on so easily, as if my absence was a relief. But every time I felt that sting, I remembered the dinner table. I remembered the laughter at my expense. I remembered the word contraception. And I waited. My moment came in November. The network wanted a massive, year-end special. The Year in Data. A 2-hour primetime show, looking back at the biggest trends of the year and predicting the year to come. And they wanted me to be the solo host. The face of the entire broadcast. It would air on Christmas Eve. Christmas Eve. The irony was not lost on me. The very night, 1 year later, that I had been humiliated, I would be on television, in front of the entire country, as a success. I didn't invite my family. I didn't warn them. I didn't send a passive-aggressive email. I did nothing. Because the best revenge isn't planned with anger. It's executed with silence. You let them live in their bubble. You let them think they won. You let them forget you exist. And then, when they least expect it, you appear. Not as the person they remember, but as a force they cannot ignore. The week of the broadcast arrived. I was nervous, but it was a controlled nervousness. I knew my material. I knew the data. I was ready. On Christmas Eve morning, I woke up early. I did my hair and makeup at the studio. I put on a sharp, crimson-red dress, the color of confidence, the color of power. I looked in the mirror, and for the first time in my life, I didn't see a mistake. I saw a woman who had survived her own family. I just hoped they would be watching. Back in my hometown at my parents' house, the second annual Christmas Eve dinner was underway. From what I later pieced together from neighbors and my brother's embarrassed social media posts, it was the same scene as last year. The same turkey. The same fine china. The same guests. Mark and his family were there. My parents were in their armchairs. The conversation, as always, revolved around Mark. His latest promotion. His new car. His brilliant son, who was already reading at age 4. My name didn't come up. It never did. I was the ghost at the feast, a topic too unpleasant to mention. My mother had probably removed my photo from the mantelpiece. My father had likely erased my existence from his mind. After dinner, they all retired to the living room. The men were half asleep, stuffed with turkey. The women were cleaning up. The television was on in the background, as it always was. They weren't really watching. It was just noise. My mother was probably flipping through a magazine. My father was dozing. The local news ended. A special program began. The intro music was grand, cinematic. A deep voice announced, and now, a CNN International special presentation. The Year in Data, with your host, Sarah Chun. My mother later told a neighbor that she almost dropped the coffee pot. My father sat bolt upright, thinking he was dreaming. There, on their 50-inch flat-screen television, was their daughter. The one they called a failed contraception. She was sitting behind a sleek, modern desk. The CNN logo glowed beneath her. She was poised. She was beautiful. She was commanding. Good evening, and welcome to a special look at the Year in Data, I said, my voice clear and confident. I'm Sarah Chin, and tonight, we're going to look at the numbers that defined our world. The living room fell into a stunned, absolute silence. Mark walked in from the kitchen, a beer in his hand. What's everyone watching? Then he saw the screen. He saw me. His face went white. Is that Sarah? His wife whispered. My mother couldn't speak. She just stared, her hand over her mouth. My father's face cycled through a series of emotions, confusion, disbelief, and then a deep, creeping shade of red. It wasn't embarrassment. It was the realization that he had been monumentally, catastrophically wrong. For the next 2 hours, they sat there, frozen, as I walked them through the biggest stories of the year. I interviewed experts. I broke down complex data into simple truths. I was in my element. I was brilliant. They saw me introduce a segment on economic recovery. They saw me debate a political analyst. They saw me close the show with a powerful monologue about resilience, and the future. At the end of the broadcast, the camera stayed on me for a final sign-off. I looked directly into the lens. I had rehearsed this line 100 times. It was a standard sign-off. But for me, it was everything. From all of us here at CNN, we wish you a peaceful and thoughtful holiday. Remember, data can show us the patterns of the world, but it's our choices that define our future. I'm Sarah Chin. Good night. The screen went to commercial. In that living room, no one moved. The silence was deafening. My mother finally spoke, her voice a croak. That was our Sarah? Mark tried to salvage the situation. It's probably just a small segment. She's probably just a temp or something. But they all knew. They knew it wasn't small. The production value, the solo hosting, the primetime slot, this was the big time. This was a level of success none of them had ever achieved. Mark was a mid-level bank manager. My father was a retired salesman. I was on international television. My phone, which I had turned back on after the show, didn't just buzz. It exploded. The first text was from my mother. It was long, rambling, and desperate. Sarah, we just saw you on TV. Why didn't you tell us? We are so proud. Call us. We need to talk. Then my father, Sarah. I don't know what to say. We need to see you. Please. Let's have dinner. A real dinner. Then Mark. Hey sis.
Wow. CNN.
That's awesome. Let's grab a drink when you're in town. So proud of you. So proud of me. Those words, which I had waited my whole life to hear, now felt like acid. They weren't proud of me when I was struggling. They weren't proud of me when I was invisible. They were proud of me now because I was on TV, because I was successful, because I was someone the world could see. My value, to them, was entirely dependent on my visibility. I read the messages one by one. I didn't respond. I let them sit there. I thought about calling them. I thought about screaming at them. I thought about sending a scathing reply, reminding them of that Christmas dinner a year ago. But I did something much more powerful. I waited until Christmas morning. I knew they'd be gathered around the tree, probably refreshing their phones, waiting for my call. Instead, I posted a photo on my public Instagram and Twitter accounts. It was a photo of me, Elena, and the entire production crew, celebrating after the show. We were holding glasses of champagne, smiling. I wrote a simple caption, grateful for my chosen family, the people who saw my potential before I ever did. Here's to the ones who lift you up, not tear you down. Happy holidays. I didn't tag my family. I didn't mention them. I just put that message out into the world for all my followers and for them to see. The reaction was immediate. My mother called 7 times. My father sent a voicemail that was just him breathing heavily before hanging up. Mark sent a text that read, "Wow, that's cold." Cold? He thought that was cold. He had sat at a table and laughed while his father called me a failed medical procedure. He had watched me leave and texted me to say I was rude. And now he thought I was being cold. I didn't respond to any of them for a week. When I finally did, it wasn't with anger. It was with finality. I sent a single email to my mother. I kept it brief and to the point. Mom, I saw your messages. I understand you saw the broadcast. I'm glad you now know what I do with my time. However, I need you to understand something. I am not your daughter because you gave birth to me. I am your daughter despite it. For years, I came back, hoping for love. I got humiliation. I got called a mistake. I got laughed at. You don't get to be proud of me now because the world is watching. You lost the right to claim me the night you sat by and let Dad reduce me to a failed contraception. I have built a life with people who value me. I am happy. I am successful. And I have made peace with the fact that I will never be the daughter you wanted. But more importantly, I have realized I don't need to be. Please do not contact me again. Not for holidays. Not for emergencies. Not ever. I wish you well. But I am closing this door.
Sarah.
I hit send. And just like that, a weight I had been carrying my entire life lifted off my shoulders. I didn't feel sad. I felt free. A few days later, a letter arrived at my apartment. It was from my father. It was handwritten, shaky, and short. Sarah, I was wrong.
I have always been wrong about you.
I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I know. I saw you on TV, and I didn't see my little girl. I saw a strong, incredible woman. And I am sorry I was too blind and too stupid to see her before. I won't bother you again. I just wanted you to know that your father, for the first time, is proud of you. Truly proud. Dad. I read the letter 3 times. I cried. I cried for the little girl who just wanted a hug. I cried for the teenager who was told she was a burden. I cried for the woman who finally heard the words she needed, 5 years too late. I kept the letter. I put it in a drawer. But I didn't call him. Some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt with a single apology. Some wounds are too deep for a simple "I'm sorry." My revenge wasn't ruining them. It wasn't screaming at them. It was simply outgrowing them. It was building a life so full, so bright, that their darkness couldn't touch it. It was becoming someone they could never hope to know, and then politely, firmly, closing the door. That Christmas, I learned the most important lesson of my life. Family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up for you when you have nothing. It's about who loves you when you're not on television. It's about who sees your worth before the world tells them to. My parents saw me on CNN. But by then, it didn't matter. Because I had finally learned to see myself. And that was the greatest revenge of all.